Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everyone to day 2 of the Jinnah Institute's Ideas Conclave for 2020. This is an annual event that features some of the best, most experienced, most vital thinkers from within the region and around the world. I'm Mosharraf Zaidi. I work for a think tank called the Bad Lab, but I consider myself not just part of the Jinnah Institute family, but in fact an essential member, and I believe the Jinnah Institute for many years now has been a vital contributor to the discourse both within this country and in the region. Privileged and thankful for the opportunity to be moderating this conversation around the issues of democracy and inclusion, which is an issue globally, but certainly an issue here in our region in South Asia as well. We have a really fantastic panel for you. I'm pleased and delighted to welcome Prem Shankar Jha, who has been an economist and a UN staffer and most importantly a journalist for many years, one of the most experienced and wisest voices for issues that face the region. Welcome, Prem Shankar Jha. We're joined by Ms. Hina Jillani. She doesn't need any introduction. Really, none of the speakers do. But Hina Jillani is one of the foremost defenders and advocates of human rights in this country and really around the world, widely acknowledged as a vital presence for anybody that's interested in a rights-based agenda and a rights-based discourse. And of course, Chaudhry Aitzaz Ahsan, a legendary leader of the Pakistan People's Party, a senator, a former minister, a leader of a movement for the restoration of the judiciary, and a keen author and observer of politics and history in our region. Welcome, Chaudhry Saab, and thank you to all three of you for joining. This is going to be a real task for me, which is to not be overwhelmed by any one of you and to try and make sure that we get a good mix of all three of you speaking, because any one of you is a mesmerizing public speaker with so much to offer in terms of insights and wisdom. I wanted to, in the great South Asian tradition, I wanted to start with Prem Shankar Jha and ask him maybe a slightly provocative or pointed question. You know, we're talking about democracy and inclusion, obviously, because in countries like India, Pakistan, the United Kingdom, East or West, anywhere in the world today, these ideas of pluralism and inclusion and participation seem to be under assault and attack. And the majoritarian instincts that are fueling this attack, many liberals, of course, take exception to them, as they rightly should. But isn't it also true that there has been a failure on the part of so-called secular, so-called liberal, so-called democratic voices and forces in India, in Pakistan, and around the world that has fueled this majoritarian populist wave that seems to be engulfing us at this moment in history? Prem Shankar Jha.
Thank you, Mosharraf. I would like to slightly differ with what you said about India. What's happening is that the voices are there, and in fact, they are as heavily present in the social media as they were, I would say, and they still are to some extent in the regular media, and they're still very much present in the print media. But the problem that we're now facing is that one by one, a series of what you might call lacunae in our basic system of checks and balances, which was enshrined in the Constitution, these are being used systematically in order to destroy the voices of civil society. And I think I've been trying to work out where this has come from, and I can, it goes back to the fact that the democratic spirit, we and I think it's also true, equally true in Pakistan, and you had even a much harder road towards democracy, and you're a good long way down it, and I must congratulate you on that. But we imposed a whole democratic structure upon our society, which had until then been entirely authoritarian. I mean, ruled by Britain, ruled by rulers before. Now, in that, the important thing was the checks and balances that were built into it. And I was looking at all the things that we did in our constitution, and if you find that actually in every area, whether it's the bureaucracy, whether it is in the electoral system, there were little sort of what you call wormholes, if you like, left through which the authoritarian impulse could escape and then try and recapture the system. For example, if you take the bureaucracy, if you look at laws like the criminal procedure, code of criminal procedure in India, you will find that it leaves the ultimate decision to even a sub-inspector of police. If he thinks that a crime is about to be committed by someone somewhere, he has the right of arrest and police custody. Now, that kind of blanket permission, usually in the last clause of your legislation, is there in all through the laws that we have passed under the Constitution. And they are now being systematically misused. I'm not saying they weren't misused before. They were misused before, but not with the specific intention of creating a majoritarian society. And they are now being used with that specific intention. And it is extremely disturbing. The civil society, the media, etc., social activists who have been fighting this. A large number are in jail under laws that were passed, which actually make the criticism of a chief minister or a prime minister an anti-national act to be punished under laws of sedition. The laws of sedition themselves were British laws which we kept on the statute books, and which for 50 years did not get used. There were only 3 attempts, and the Supreme Court smashed them down each time. But then suddenly, and again, this is before the present government came, they began to be used more and more. For example, against the Maoists in Chhattisgarh and so on. And now it's become very normal for a journalist or a civil rights activist who criticizes the government to be just picked up and put in jail for 2 years. And there are a large number of people, including some friends of mine, who are in jail just now.
So I think, Prem Sahab, I want to make sure that we... Please go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Last. You see, I think the democratic spirit, which needs to precede the effectiveness of the checks and balances we put in, that was weak to start with and has not been allowed to develop, and now is being its weakness is being taken advantage of.
So I think it's a really good description of how this assault is being undertaken, what the tools are. I guess my question was really, why now? What has happened? And my provocation, Madam Hina and Jillani, I bring this question to you. My provocation to you is that there has to have been some vacuum or some failure that has prompted this particularity of the manifestation of this majoritarianism. In India, for a good, I would say, 40, 50 years, at least domestically, these tools weren't being used in that manner. I've heard many Pakistani liberals and human rights activists talk about how this might be even worse than the Zia era in terms of the instinct to suppress free speech, for example. You know, whatever we might think of those assertions, I guess what I want to explore is why now? What is it that has caused this populism and the acceptance of this behavior in the public discourse? You'll need to unmute, madam, so we can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's a very good question, and something that has been of concern to many of us, and we've been sort of thinking about why this is happening and why now. But I think the main issue here is not why it is happening now. The main thing is what were the, and I won't call these failures, but what are the elements that have more recently emerged that make it difficult for people to propagate one kind of view and not another. When you call people liberal, I think it's mostly people who are progressive and are thinking about the constitutional guarantees that exist, and they presume that those guarantees are there to be realized. And but when you realize them, and I think Prem has very eloquently described the processes that make it difficult for you to realize your rights, even though they are there in writing. There are eras in Pakistan, for instance, where some of these rights were more liberally available. And I think those are the eras that saw a civil society emerge and grow. It is also true that in Pakistan, in particular, the coherence of the messages that the civil society has been wanting to give for a long, long time became much more pronounced during Zia's time as a part of the resistance. But as things eased, and I think in the 90s, the civil society became stronger. And I think that has brought the backlash now against them. As they became stronger, the voices were amplified, and a lot of issues that were suppressed and not talked about were then became a part of the public discourse. And the state that has always been more concerned with imposing control has in then kind of enhanced its power to control, whereas their ability to protect has waned over the years. So when you talk about failures, I would not say that it's the failure of the voices that were being raised. The voices are still being raised. And Prem is very right that the voices do exist. But when you uh, think of the environment in which those voices are being suppressed by various means, then you can understand why people's messages are not going through. There is in Pakistan, and you know this very well, Mosharraf. You're in the field itself. There is suppression of freedom of expression. Freedom of association is under so much attack that the civil society now has to confront a shrinking space, and there is almost panic in the civil society at this time to survive. And then again, there is this very strong campaign of vilification that goes on at the level of the state. When the media is controlled, when people started going to the cyberspace because they thought they would have more space there, or even that space has now become not just difficult for people to freely express their views, but it's become a place where there are so many dangers. Look at the kind of repression that bloggers are experiencing. Human rights defenders who speak out in the cyberspace are today in Pakistan and in India, and I'm afraid all over South Asia, now under a great deal of stress because of the kind of clampdown that is coming from various quarters. In Pakistan, in particular, the problem is that now everything has become an instrument of security. Everything now, even your religion, is now being used and abused as an instrument of security. So everything is now connected with how the state perceives the national security imperatives and how it imposes those imperatives without giving any space to anyone in the civil society or generally for anyone to either challenge those imperatives or the narratives that surround those imperatives. And I mean, I'm a woman, and I keep hearing about this women's empowerment and women dealing with issues of conflict, etc. And at the UN level also we keep hearing about it. But it doesn't give me empowerment when I'm only included in the conflict issues to the extent of looking after IDPs. I feel very good looking after IDPs, but I want to be at the table to decide what the security imperatives are in my country that affect my life and the life of other citizens in this country. So these are some of the things where spaces being closed down show you how populist leaders then get more and more space to propagate ideas. If you look at the United States, for instance, at this time, you think racism was not there before Trump came? So it's not that people don't hold those prejudices. The only thing is that they can't manifest them in the public domain unless and until the environment is deliberately built by a leadership so that those prejudices can affect the political and social environment.
So that's a perfect. I think that's a perfect segue for me to frame, my question to Chaudhry Saab, Madam. I thank you for that. I guess when I say failure, it's not necessarily, although I wouldn't shy away from it, but it's not necessarily an accusation against the rights-based communities in anywhere in the world. It's more a question of a failure at some macro level. Maybe a collective failure, maybe a specific failure. I think states really have failed to fulfill the promise of the social contract everywhere. You had British folks that have benefited from 70 years of post-war stability who, rather than exercising their choice to double down on unity and cohesion and borderless trade, chose to exit the European Union. So A, I don't think this is a South Asian problem specifically, and B, I don't know if it's necessarily a liberal failure, but there is some failure, liberal, progressive, rights-based, but there's some failure somewhere, Chaudhry Saab, because what breaks my heart actually is to be on a panel with Prem Shankar Jha and Hina, Jillani and Aitzaz Ahsan, having followed the careers and the incredible work that folks like you, and there's so many others, but the three of you have done this incredible work on constitutionalism, on pluralism, on bringing people together. But when I look at South Asia today and I look at our individual societies and countries, we're more divided internally than maybe we've ever been, and we're certainly much further apart from the spirit of the Indus saga than we were when that book was published. I don't mean to bring a downer on the conversation, but certainly it begs some questioning of the overall discourse and how we got here. So when I challenge this question of failure, it's not necessarily that Chaudhry Saab has failed, or Pakistan or India or the Congress or the PPP has failed, but there is some system-wide lack of effectiveness, certainly, that is creating the space for populists to appeal to the lesser instincts of the good people of South Asia and the world over. Is there not, Chaudhry Saab? And you'll have to unmute to start speaking.
I think...
Gee, you're on mute. You're good. You're good. Please.
Yeah, you're good. Mosharraf, it's a privilege really to be on a panel with Hina and Premji. So it's let me express that first. Secondly, straight away, I think the topic we are discussing is actually quite simple, and in one respect, in that democracy without inclusion is no democracy. Democracy has to include everybody. For instance, the extreme cases, for instance, is we really do not accept as democracy the ancient city-states of Greece, where 90% of the population was excluded from the status of citizenship and were slaves. So you can't really say that was democracy. It was democracy maybe within an elite. Similarly, in America, until the 19th century, they had slavery. Until the 20th century, the women did not have a right to vote. Until the 20th century, the blacks had in most states didn't have a right to vote. And it was really around 1864 that some modicum of equality in terms of law was achieved. And even there, the social situation remained far behind the law. But what was being spoken of, and I think very profound words have been said here and thoughts articulated. Actually, I should be more worried, and I'm more worried about South Asia than about America or the Europeans. Although our diaspora lives in fear now in Europe and walks in fear in European streets today, and that very all-embracing Europe and England, for instance, the city of London, plural, multicultural, diverse, is losing patience with itself, with France perhaps leading the contest between two. Really, it's down to the clash of civilizations, it seems. But I'm more concerned about South Asia, because that is home, that is me, that is my children, that is my friends, that is the people I interact with, be they on this side of the border, like you and Hina, or Premji on the other side of the one most important and most critical border between India and Pakistan. There are other borders also in India, and India has some problems with some massive problems with China today, and who is encroaching upon whose territory. I'm not going into that. Where I find there are two things. First of all, I remember we used to envy India, and Premji, we really used to. We used to, people used to ask us if I said I'm going to Delhi. They'd say, "Are you not, give my love to so and so, so and so?" But if an Indian was coming to Pakistan, his friends would say, "Will you be safe in Pakistan?" Today, it's almost the reverse. If a Pakistani is going to India, the question that arises, the issue that arises, will he be safe in India? And India used to be an Indian cities and Indian society used to be so open. So you could just go there and gel with people. If you wanted to wear shoes, you could walk around with shoes. You could walk around without shoes. There was M.F. Hussain wearing suit and tie and barefooted. So, and India was plural. India was progressive. India was diverse in every sense of the word. And there has been a great loss. We, on the other hand, were not that inclusive, particularly after 1965. We gradually became more and more a security state. And under Ziaul Haq, we became a religious security state, which was a great leap backwards. But India seemed to be a place where Muslims seemed to be thriving. At that time, the presidents could be Muslims, chief justices were Muslims, the chief ministers were Muslims. And despite the fact that India continued in our terminology and in our thoughts and views, it continued to occupy Kashmir, the Indian side occupied Kashmir, we, by and large, the Indian society was an open and a free society where you could where you had great freedom of expression. But today, unfortunately, India is far beyond us, beyond even our Ziya's days, where people are being hacked for not saying Jai Ram, for instance. And they're being forced, they've been killed, there's blood on the streets. But there is a plurality in India still, and one must admit that if a Vani or a Najib, particularly a Najib of JNU, goes missing, it is the JNU president, Students' Union president, who's a Hindu, who marches out for him. There are some pluses there, but it's been the most grievous, I think, loss to the international community, the way India has gone. India has today, and this is a fact, today imprisoned, literally imprisoned 10 million people in Kashmir. They are under curfew for more than a year. And Mr. Modi has made an amazing tactical move. The day of the arrest of these 10 million people in Kashmir, or in an open sort of a jail, where the curfew has been imposed, where the army is occupying it. In that place where the rights have, the fundamental rights have been denuded, in that place, there is a resistance, and that resistance will grow. And I don't think India can defeat that resistance by more violence. And instead, what Modi has done very cleverly, he because Article 370 was repealed by the Indians on the 5th of August 2019. They have, Modi ji has gone and laid the first brick of the Ayodhya Ram Mandir on the 5th of August. He had this quaint sort of a very colorful ceremony where he lay down on the ground with Ramji's statue in front of him in gold, and did that ceremony, the stone laying ceremony of the Ram Mandir on that day. So every day that the Muslims will be actually mourning every year as a date of the great reduction of their rights and the great tragedy for the Muslims in India, he will have Hindus celebrating. And if I were a Hindu, I would probably celebrate that as a very major event in my life, during my lifetime. So he has in fact been has not only created these schisms, but he has gone on to cleverly implant them in an indefinite future, for an indefinite, indelible period of time. As Trump is trying to do in some things like the peace in Israel, or thinking of bombing Iran before he goes out, and creates these schisms. Here, I think in India, the critical factor, because we are also debating as to not only what is, but why it is. I think the Hindutva theme that has been brought in is probably due largely to one man, and that is Narendra Modi. It is like the power of one, how one can affect a lot of or millions. Gandhi did in the opposite direction, and he tried to include the minorities and the oppressed and the Harijans. Harijans, in fact, are God's children.
Chaudhry Sahab, if you don't mind, because you've artfully depicted and explained a manifestation of this majoritarian or populism, but there's a couple of things. I mean, one, I think and it's probably just a manner of speaking, but I think it's important, just because you're a Hindu doesn't necessarily make you a supporter of Hindutva. As you yourself have taught me, Pakistan itself has a large Hindu population, and I'm absolutely certain, based on personal experience, that none of them are subscribers to Hindutva. So I'm sure there's Indians as well that oppose this project. But I think the question that I wanted to frame for Prem Shankar Jha is really almost even starker than the one that I'd begun with. I thought that would be provocative enough, but essentially, if we take at face value Chaudhry Aitzaz Ahsan's presentation, Prem Shankar Jha, then we are now stuck in a vortex, because each of these actions has an equal and opposite reaction. Domestically, I'm absolutely certain that Hindutva is going to help radicalize Indian Muslims, whether we accept that is a reality or not. And secondly, I think that the narratives about each other, between Indians and Pakistanis, it's interesting. Chaudhry Aitzaz Ahsan and myself and many Pakistanis and neutral observers blame Narendra Modi for what's happened to India. But, I've seen plenty of really very high caliber intellectuals of an Indian disposition or an Indian background, like Kapil Komireddy, for example, that actually blame Muhammad Ali Jinnah for everything that's happening today. As ridiculous as I may find that assertion, these are serious people in the Indian discourse that really look at Pakistan and Pakistan's behavior as the root of the creation and sustenance of the mainstreaming of Hindutva. How do you conduct that kind of a conversation within India when you're confronted by this, Prem Shankar Jha?
I think Kapil Komireddy is completely wrong. I was going to come to the majoritarianism. I think Hina raised it and you raised it. And I think that we have to understand this. It's a much deeper problem. And it's a problem that you and us, Pakistan and India, and I think also Bangladesh, all share. It is this. First and foremost, none of our countries are producing enough jobs, but we're producing lots of children. Today, there are in India more than 100 million people between the ages of 16 and 60 who've given up looking for jobs. Now, this is an official figure which came out within the Modi government regime only last February. So therefore, it's not a question of, it's not an area of dispute. Now, these are not random people who've been left out of the economic system. They are people who do not, the vast majority are people who have no command over English. And the problem in India for us is that we have maybe 7, 8, 10 major languages, and we cannot learn them all. We have to have one linked language, and that linked language by sort of default has been English. So the parts of India where the educational system of the government did emphasize English, which is to say the entire South and the East, particularly the Northeast, they have been able to move out from there and get jobs all over India. On the other hand, in northern India, and I suspect that is to a large extent true in Pakistan too, once you get out of the elite school system. In northern India, in government schools, particularly the Hindi-speaking places, said we do not, we want Hindi as a national language, and they downplayed English. Result is that people from there, even with MAs and things, because you cannot communicate any business or any government job that requires you to deal with another state government or with another country or a company abroad, you just got to have a linked language. We didn't have it. So what this has done is it's split India into an English-speaking elite, which is not even I wouldn't call it even elite, a section, which has been able to get the majority of the jobs, and another section which is unable to get them at all. And it is the second section, the dispossessed. They're not just dispossessed by caste, they're dispossessed by language, they're dispossessed by education, they're dispossessed by economics because they can't get jobs. And the young people come up and they have, what do they see? They see no future. And it is them that the RSS and the BJP has been recruiting in large numbers, giving them an alternative future. And that alternative future is actually it's
a fantasy. It's a fantasy.
I mean, it's a fantasy. You're quite right. But the point is, when you have nothing, you believe in a fantasy. Now, once you come to power, you have to satisfy these people in some way. Now, I'm going to give you an example which I think that is very relevant, and particularly to the majoritarianism issue. And you see how different the real motives are from the ostensible motives. Let's take the anti-cow slaughter movement and the lynchings and the killings and the murders that have taken place of various people, along the way, something like 30 or 40 people at least, have, great high publicity, been pulled out of cars and jeeps and vans and killed with videos going on. Now, what is actually happening is, I'll give you, I won't take names, but here's precisely what happens. There's a cattle fair. There are large numbers of Muslims are in the dairy business, and why not? Of course, and they periodically have to buy cattle. Now, there are people there who watch them, and who are now actually at the fairs for this purpose to see who buys a cow as distinct from buffalo. Everyone wants to buy buffaloes because the milk is richer and it's more reliable, and you get more income from selling it. So the buffaloes cost about twice as much as a cow, in these cattle fairs. Now they go. There's this man called Pehlu Khan. He couldn't afford a buffalo, so he bought a cow with 2 calves. Now he was stopped on the way back to his dairy and his village. How did they know he was coming? There's only one answer. It's the mobile phone. I worked out backwards from that story, that there are people watching every cattle fair, seeing who's buying these, who then telephone on ahead, see which direction they're going. They may even get into conversation with them, find out more about them. Others stop them, motorcycle-born people stop those things, and then they blackmail them. And if they can't produce money, then they start beating them. This is what's happening. It's a whole business. It's an alternative source of income. It's an income stream that has been created, and it's entirely criminal. And under the name of cow slaughter and preventing cow slaughter, it's been totally legitimized. This is the kind of thing that's going on today. And the state police are involved in it. They cover up the evidence, and it's a horror show. That's all I can call it. But at the root of it, there is this divide that has been created. In India, it's got a name. It's the divide between Lutyens, Delhi, and the rest. And anybody who's in the civil society is automatic, and who writes in English is Lutyens, Delhi. But if I don't write in English, how do I communicate with people in the south, with elites in the south? If I don't write in Hindi, how do I communicate with ordinary people, the dispossessed in the north? They are dispossessed, and you have to have sympathy for them. If we do not see these problems, one day, so long as our democracy lasts, there will be a change of government here. In fact, I can see the trends already in the Bihar elections. But That will happen, and there may be an attempt even to prevent that, but I would not go that far. I wouldn't jump to any conclusions about that. Whenever the chance comes, we must. Here in Pakistan, you have equally elitist system, and you have an even larger left out community of people who are studying in madrasas, who, however good the madrasa, in the end, unless they have a good knowledge of English, they do not get good jobs. So this problem has got to be solved.
Absolutely.
And this is the root cause of the kind of crypto-fascism, the Sturmabteilung kind of the SA that will be developing in India, and probably, I think, to a large extent had developed earlier and still exists in Pakistan. I think we need to look at the deeper causes of what's going on, and to sort of also ask ourselves to what extent, through lack of thought and through being content with benefiting from this process, we have allowed it to happen to us.
I think this, Premji, that's exactly the spirit of the conversation that I wanted to have. And again, I don't think there's a better group to have it with in terms of self-reflection and corrective. We'll come to the correctives and the way forward, because I think it'll be desperately unfair for us to have a conversation like this without trying to identify pathways forward. But before we get there, Madam, I wanted to bring this question to you. We talk, the topic being democracy and inclusion. Prem Shankar Jha just mentioned exclusion. And I thought his description of the cow slaughter mafia is, in a sense, quite similar in many ways to so many blasphemy cases that are rooted in property and other personal disputes. It's never surprising, and yet still always surprising, to see how much of a mirror image these two great people and countries are, the people of India and the people of Pakistan. And so often, unfortunately, in such negative and contemptuous and contemptible ways. But really, the fact that all of this is happening means at some level that there's been an exclusion of voices that now are falling in line with this majoritarian trend. One manifestation of this was the Lahore funeral of Khadim Hussain Rizvi, which we saw last weekend, and I thought it was a moment of deep concern for Pakistanis, especially from the perspective of class and exclusion of those that can't, for example, speak English. And the horror that we feel at looking at the size of that crowd, anywhere between 1 and 2 million, is not manifest in how we engage with policy in terms of concern for those that have been excluded. What is it that we can do to understand this problem better? How much of it is this class, or do you think that this class issue is a cover for essentially a state-sponsored, sustenance of certain kinds of narratives? Because I know that's an alternative explanation for what's happened and what is happening. Madam, please unmute before you speak. Thank you.
I think your last sentence said it all. I think it's both. There are so many social and economic factors that maybe in many ways explain the direction that your political, dispensation is taking. I don't think that it's this Khadim Hussain thing is really an issue of exclusion. It's also an issue of what I said in the earlier part of my response to your questions, was that where the state uses either religion, ultranationalism, or a tendency in the state to impose homogeneity, that in many ways creates that impression that we get. Of course, there are different kinds of people throughout South Asia. Of course, it's not a homogeneous society anywhere in any of the South Asian countries. And of course, there is diversity and there is pluralism. And of course, we can make a decision. Either we decide to celebrate that pluralism and accommodate diversity in all our structures of governance, of religious diversity, ethnic diversity. Either we decide to do that, or we decide to abolish it. And when states or societies have tried to abolish it, they have in many ways been annihilated. And I don't think that it's really fair when we talk about South Asia to just talk about India and Pakistan. The trends we are talking about are there in Sri Lanka. They are there in Bangladesh. Nepal is experiencing this very much to their horror, to the horror of those who think like you and me. So these are some of the trends that are growing, and they are really growing because, from example, leadership has learned that they benefit from these trends. And these trends have helped them to impose authoritarianism and to in many ways narrow down the space for dissent. You know, if you create a hoo-ha and create an artificial sensitivity around certain topics, and somebody wants to say something and which is not suitable to the kind of narrative that the state is trying to promote, it becomes blasphemy to say those things. And then you are either a traitor or a blasphemer or whatever. I think Choy Saab has very correctly pointed out what the problems are in India. We may have the same problems at a different scale in Pakistan, and some different problems as well. But these are serious enough to affect the decency of our lives in this country as well. So I would remind you very much that these are trends that need to be discouraged all over. And we cannot say that one country is worse than the other. We suffer as much from these trends, whatever scale or level of these trends may be existing in our country. Today, we talk about the rights of non-Muslim citizens in Pakistan. We even have a Supreme Court judgment that has, very strong comments against trends that are making non-Muslim citizens of this country their lives difficult. The Supreme Court, it's an unprecedented judgment where they have even set up an implementation bench to make sure that these trends are reversed. But at the same time, nothing happens. In the past 6 months, how many non-Muslims have been killed or subjected to heinous and brutal crimes, and nobody takes any action on that? The authorities are totally silent, especially when it's an Ahmadi that has come under somebody's axe. So I think we need to understand that these are things that really create conflict. And I remember that conflict is not the absence of war. We may not be at war with India or any of our other neighbors, but at the same time, even this absence of war doesn't mean that our communities are at peace. We are under deep social conflicts today, everywhere, whether they are communal or ethnic or social. Even this whole gender inequality and disparity is a kind of conflict that we have to grapple with, because it's affecting people's lives. It's affecting them psychologically, it's affecting them physically. It's making it difficult for them to contribute to national life in a way in which we can help and contribute in the reversal of these trends. So I think it's very important for us not to just philosophize, but to see where the construction of the states that we have created are in themselves in conflict with the interest of the people of these countries.
Well, let me ask you, ma'am, I think that's an incredibly important point, and I want to ask you to just delve a little bit deeper on this point, because you said it's not about being philosophical, but so much of the state's writ or the idea of the state is increasingly just conceptual. I would argue that even if the state wanted to do something about arresting some of these narratives, for example, the what happened just recently in terms of the Ahmadi family that a home was, the door was knocked, somebody walked in and shot a 31-year-old. Now that kind of thing, one way of looking at this is, even if the state wanted to, It actually can't prevent that. I would say that some of the anti-love jihad and the cow slaughter discourses in India, I mean, even if Narendra Modi himself started a campaign against this, it would damage him because the people would turn on him. So to what extent are we watching a negative kind of withering away of state capacity under the pressures that these narratives have created?
The state, in the first place, nourishes and fosters these tendencies. And when they become too big, it becomes very difficult for them to halt and seize these tendencies only because it's not suitable for them anymore. So let's also look at that angle of it. The state is not a helpless observer. The state has a wit. And if the state had the mind to do things, they do it. You're talking about Khadim Hussain Rizvi. What happened when Asiya Bibi's case was, when she was acquitted? They came to Islamabad, but the state didn't want them to, and they whimpered away and went back. So it's not as if we can't say that the state is helpless. The state knows when and how to act. And if there has been a consistent policy of tolerance, of promoting these, then they would supplement the legislation that they bring in from time to time. And here I'm talking about, again, the more vulnerable classes, like women or the non-Muslim citizens or children. We have a lot of legislation. Although this legislation has come despite the state because of the civil society movements. Not because of the state, but despite the state. But nevertheless, there is legislation and a good legal framework, or a reasonably good legal framework. But what is lacking is a strong social policy to back these laws. The state deliberately does not back legislation to protect people by a strong social policy, because they, as I said earlier, they are not interested in enhancing their capacity or ability to protect. They are only interested in enhancing their ability to control. So everything is concentrated there. And I still don't believe that the state is incapable, when they want to control tendencies or to make sure that there is no impunity for violence, for instance. People have their prejudices, and they will always have them. The only thing is, when those prejudices manifest themselves in violence, then the state has to do something about it. And when accountability and impunity become something that the state takes seriously, then I can tell you that mindsets change. When I was doing work on honor killings and I was interviewing those who indulged in this abhorrent practice, I can tell you that there is so much difference now. When they know that they can go to jail and that there is no reprieve for them in the law or in the judicial condemnation of such practice, everybody denies that this is honor killing. Otherwise, earlier, people would very in a big glory, they would say, yes, this is honor killing, only because they knew that they'd get away with it. And that's the same thing with blasphemy law.
I think that's an incredibly important point. Chaudhry Saab, this idea of the state being a neutral arbiter and having the capacity to essentially not just exercise or execute what already exists as policy, but also to act as a decider on what will or won't become a norm in the future through its behavior, right? So this capacity to be both coercive, but also to set precedent, and in a sense, in the harshest or most crude terms, to show its teeth and to essentially force people to consider the consequences of their actions. You were, I think the leader of the movement for the restoration of the judiciary. Without getting into the person of the Chief Justice at the time and whatever other issues there might exist there, and focusing specifically on the rule of law, and having observed what's been happening in India in terms of recent Supreme Court judgments, also making themselves supplicant to the overarching populist and majoritarian instincts on the street. How do you protect the rule of law and the idea of the state and the law as being arbiters of neutrality when judges themselves and justice institutions like courts themselves are subject to the same weaknesses and frailties and human instincts that everybody else is?
Actually, these last three words, Mosharraf, are the key to my mind. That everybody else is. Actually, we are all guilty. As Hina's great father, not grandfather, but her father, a unique person. He walked alone with a placard in his hand during martial law from up to the presidency. And the presidency housed a martial law administrator who was brutal, who had whipped people, lashed them, hanged them. And what did the placard read? You will recall that, Hina. It read, "We are all guilty." My greatest regret, Premji, is that we are really the hinged generation. That hinged generation that had liberal thoughts, that had plurality in their hearts and mind, that didn't believe that the Shia was a kafir or the Sunni was a kafir and therefore had to be eliminated. They had friends among Hindus, among Sikhs, particularly in our family, and being Punjabi and Jats and then Sikhs across the border, and the family friends and families as friends. And on our watch, in our watch of the last 6 to 7 decades, we have allowed the society to deteriorate and degenerate to an extent that, alas, and I feel helpless, and I feel broken by that at this point of my life, that we've not been able to, we are not going to leave that society, and this includes the state and society and the judiciary and everybody else and all of us. We are not going to leave to our children the quality of society that we inherited from our parents, despite the fact that some were congressmen, some were Muslims, some were Hindus, some were Sikhs, some were with Muslim League. All that, still there was a tolerance for plurality. The killings, the brutality of 1946 and 47 at the time of partition seemed to be a madness that we had been possessed with for a time being, that we had that didn't come naturally to us, and we were back in our natural mode and form soon after 47. Soon after, where Madhubala and Dalip Kumar were the rage in Pakistan. Cricket teams were going and playing cricket on either side, until we, and this is first us, became a security state. We transformed from a very bad, inefficient welfare state of the 50s into a perhaps more efficient under Ayub Khan, perhaps more efficient, but into, let's say, an efficient but a security state. And when the security state a security state, its main stake is with people who are contributing or deemed to be contributing to the security of the state, while a welfare state prioritizes the welfare of every individual. So, but we became a security state. And unfortunately, India and Pakistan, because we could have imbibed a lot of good things from India. They could have imbibed some good things from us, but we could have imbibed a lot of good things from India. And it is my regret that one, we did not imbibe them, and two, they are now leaving us no room to imbibe anything that was good in India and the Indian society. Now the Hinge generation allowed even Ziaul Haq to rule us. We joined him. We were with him. There was a difference between Ayub Khan and Ziaul Haq. Ayub Khan could at least venture to promulgate the family laws ordinance and the Muslim inheritance laws and etc. Ziaul Haq was just the opposite. They were both uniformed men, and I don't prefer uniformed men to rule the country. But even then, there was a difference. But we permitted Ziaul Haq. We joined his cabinets. We joined his parliament. We supported him wholeheartedly. When Mosharraf came, we were with Mosharraf. We would have him elected 10 times in uniform, and all that kind of thing. Now, as a Hinge generation between a plural, liberal, diverse, multicultural, multi-religious society to a fanatical society that bays for blood before they even let a man reply whether he has done something that is horrible or not, whether it is blasphemous or not. They stone him and they kill him before he can, on just, in Julius Caesar, there is this poet whose Seneca is being chased by a whole crowd of lynchers, and they are saying, kill him, he's Seneca the senator, he's Seneca the senator, kill him, kill him. He turns around and he says, while he's running, he turns around and says, I'm not Seneca the senator, I'm not Seneca the senator, I'm Seneca the poet. So the crowd stops, it doesn't know what to do, it looks at each other, and then somebody shouts, kill him for his bad poetry. So this is the kind of mindset that we have all either adopted or not resisted, or and that is just as bad, though we have condemned it, but privately. We had not really been able to make it a part of public discourse. And therein, as I said, I feel quite unhappy. You asked me last, and I won't take long. I've spoken, I've taken a lot of time, about the judiciary and the movement, lawyers' movement. And of course, Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry. I was disappointed with the performance of the Chief Justice Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry after his reinstatement. And we shared a lot of dreams with him of which what we could do if we got onto the commanding height of the judicial commanding height. Commanding heights in Lenin's terminology. He fell many notches lower than my expectations even. But the judiciary itself has not, really, in my mind, and I've said it on the media in Pakistan many times, has not itself, as a whole, as an entire body, impressed me too much. In fact, the lawyer movement made them vain and arrogant. They think the whole world was with them. They were doing nothing. They were sitting at their homes. We were getting the beaten up, etc. But they think they are God's gift to mankind. Now, this is a disappointing result. But lastly, should I have been one of the leaders of that movement, and do I regret being there? No. I think it was not about a man or these men. It was about concepts. It was about issues and principles. And it was about this major principle that an army man cannot send a chief justice or a judge home just because he doesn't like him. So I think that it was a great movement. Had we anticipated that it is not going to give us great results and opted out of it, we would have betrayed the people of Pakistan, who we had mobilized. And it is probably in South Asia the only movement, mass movement, which in 2 years only in 2 years, achieved the stated objective. So I'm happy with that.
I share that sense of pride with you, Chaudhry Saab. Many like me, and I myself followed you in various parts of the country and all through the night on that pleasant March night when it happened. I think that, of course, our sense of optimism that night has not been met with the realities that have ensued since. But I think at some level, a lot of us want to relive the hopefulness that such moments create. Prem Shankar Jha, when we look at India, and please, of course,
can I intervene here for a second? I'm sorry, Prem. I just wanted to add to what Chaudhry Saab has just said, because as a lawyer, I was also a part of that movement. And also as a human rights defender, I take many of my causes to court. So the role of the judiciary is very important for human rights defenders when they are doing a lot of their rights-based advocacy through the courts. At that time, many like me were very clear in our mind. We were not there for a single person. We were there to protect the institution from a dictator. So there were two messages we were giving. One was a message to the dictator saying, you don't mess with the Supreme Court and the independence of the judiciary. The second message was very clearly meant for judges. Remember, we are a country where the judiciary as a whole has never had a very contributing role towards protection of democracy or human rights in this country. And I say that very clearly. I think individual judges have done their bit and have given us much relief, but judiciary as a whole, as an institution. So our message was also for the judges, saying when you do the right thing and you stand up against this oppression and this arbitrariness that a military dictator imposes on you, we are behind you. That was the message of the bar for the judiciary. Unfortunately, they failed to take that message. And I do hope that even today, the judiciary realizes this, that there is a clear separation of power, in our constitution. And when we dislike the way that one institution erodes constitutional red lines, then we are also equally offended when another institution also steps beyond its limits and takes on that authoritarian attitude that they know best. If you sit on the bench, the Bodhi tree doesn't sprout behind you to give you all the wisdom in the world. So I think judicial power are also to be exercised judiciously, and I think as an institution, our judiciary still needs to learn it. I have great respect for certain individual judges who have given us very good judgments and sometimes have changed many things and many mindsets in this country because of these judgments.
So I think it's always tricky to talk about judges, and I also don't want the audience to think that we've shifted course. I think that in a conversation about democracy and inclusion, the role of the judiciary as an arbiter and as a guarantor of level playing field for all citizens is absolutely essential. I think you're right.
I believe in that. I believe in that. And that's why I knock at their door all the time, regardless of what level of faith I have in the judiciary.
We see a kind of similar thing in India, where, as I was saying earlier, Prem Shankar Jha, we have been, I think, roundly disappointed as a region by some of the more seminal decisions that have been taken in the last 3 or 4 years in both countries. And what it does, I feel, perhaps fairly or unfairly, is it further reinforces the lack of faith that right-minded people, even conservative ones, not just liberals, but people who have a sense of fairness in mind, it convinces them further of the grand failure of the Western liberal state structure, the parliament, the judiciary, and the executive, the separation of powers, and the idea of a balance between them. Because in both countries, for different reasons, I think Hindutva is a very unique phenomenon in terms of what it's done to India's institutions. And in Pakistan, of course, the interinstitutional competition and the dominance of the Pakistani military has had a separate story and a separate trajectory. But at the end of the day, both overarching forces have washed over the capacity of the concepts of the modern state to work the way they should. In the last few minutes of this discussion, I just wanted each of you, starting with Prem Shankar Jha, to chart out a pathway to get better from here. How do we heal our institutions? How do we heal our organizations, our political parties, our unions, our judiciary, and even our military and intelligence services? And how do we heal individuals, especially those that need the healing the most, those that are damaged the most by this these miscarriages of justice across institutions and individuals? Prem Shankar Jha.
Thank you, Mosharraf. This is, I'm going to make this as short as I can because you're running out of time. But let me say one thing. First of all, I think institutions by themselves are structures. They have to give them life, you need to infuse them with a democratic spirit. What we did not have when we started was the democratic spirit. It had to be created. And we were doing very well in India. You started off all right, but then you got sidetracked and then you came back to it. And you're doing it now. But the fact is that the spirit was there and is there today. But as I explained, there are economic factors, there are social factors which have created cleavages in society where a large section has not benefited from these and is trying an alternative majoritarian way of becoming relevant and making a secure future for themselves. And that is in fact the kind of people who are joining the RSS and BJP in large numbers today. And as you know, the BJP's share of the vote jumped surprisingly to 37% from 30%, instead of having fallen after 5 years of very bad, very poor government. But that has got nothing to do with the performance of the government. It has to do with the enlisting of people who are out of the structure, bringing them into the political structure in the worst possible way. I think that if we're looking forward and how we deal with this, first and foremost, we must have an opposition in both countries to whoever's in power at that moment, and and whatever structures in power, for example, democratic plus military, or however it is, which keeps reminding them that, look, you are not doing the right thing, that you are traducing the institutions that you claim to be upholding, or that under which you enjoy power. And that can only come from a political opposition. And that political opposition in India has been totally fractured in the past, just now, for two reasons. One is that most of it is regionally based and needs a central core. The central core should have been the Congress, but the Congress is actually it's difficult to put this in mild words. It has really abandoned its role of coalescing and bringing together an alternative view of India and India's future to the Hindutva view that is being pushed relentlessly by the present government. And for that, I frankly, honestly blame the leadership, and particularly Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi, because they don't understand this. When people in Congress have tried to talk to them about it, they have been, shut down. Shut down is the right word, and polar and isolated within the party itself. So that leaves you with a series of very, very strong local movements, statewide movements, which are highly democratic, which work very democratically within their own areas. I mean, given obvious limitations of influence and pedigree. But the fact is, they can't come together yet. There's no third front. There was an attempt about 10 years ago to create a third front. That fizzled out. Then it's not been revived. And if the Congress does not, in fact, play the role of the catalyzer of this in the coming 3.5 years, we are going to get another 5 years of the BJP RSS government. And after that, I don't know. I think India will become completely unrecognizable. I want to say one more thing about the spirit of majoritarianism. It is much weaker than you think. It is much, much weaker. I pointed out to you the whole case of the cow slaughter thing and how it is organized blackmail. When you can't get the money you want, then you start beating them up. Pehlu Khan's case, he had only 50,000 rupees. He couldn't buy a buffalo because it cost 60,000. So he bought a cow and calf for 45,000. And he had only 5,000 rupees left. I suspect he tried to give that 5,000, and the people who were, after him, this was not enough. So they broke open the van, found the cow there, and there was the excuse that was waiting for them. The fact that it was a milch cow with 2 calves, obviously, very obviously not for slaughter, made no difference. They decided they'd take it out on this man because he didn't have the money to give them. And the blackmail story I've heard, it's been in the papers. I've heard it over and over again, from in verbal discussions. This is basically what the cow slaughter movement became. So I think that we do need to, at this moment, understand where we are going, and to see that there are economic, linguistic, elite versus non-elite causes, and the fact that if we do not adjust our educational system, if we do not adjust the curricula in our system, for example, I think that India absolutely, essentially, at every level, from the secondary school stage onwards, needs a course in comparative religion. Because we have all the 6 great religions of the world right here inside our country, and we need to understand each other. All great religions say exactly the same thing when it comes to telling you how to live. So why on earth can this simple point, not be brought home to children who are in the most impressionable ages of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? I mean, this is something I do not understand. It's the same thing with why are they not all taught English? Why has English been made a sort of an enclave language for the elite? So we need to get to these root causes, and over time they will change things. In the meantime, we just have to keep on struggling. We have a very strong civil society in India, and we are. I speak not only for myself, but I've seen it all around me. I've seen it in where I live. There is no overt, communalism in India today. It is something that is being nursed and fomented through cadres in the BJP and RSS. I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Prem Shankar Jha. Madam, I bring the same kind of question to you. And again, we're just running a little bit short of time, but very quickly, a couple of ideas about the way forward. And maybe say something about how strong Pakistani civil society is. I've often argued it's much stronger than Indian civil society because it's had to deal with so much more. It's seen off much bigger challenges. I mean, today, maybe it's different, but over 70 years, certainly Pakistani civil society is remarkable in its strength, its resilience, and its character. Is that going to be the pathway for us to a better future?
One of the pathways, I would say. It is a strong civil society. It's one that has shown resilience. Despite all the difficulties and the challenges we face, we still exist. So in many ways, I think that the civil society and the strength of the civil society, if it is recognized as one of the essential pillars that supports the edifice of the society and the state, I think that is the critical thing. If civil society is taken in a way as if they are the adversaries and there is a hostile attitude towards them, we still make achievements, but those achievements will be slow, and that will not in any way help us to balance the power of the state in many ways and to check the power of the state. This civil society has done and made a lot of contributions in strengthening institutions. I just spoke about the judiciary, for instance. One of our firmest belief is in the independence of the judiciary, and we fight for that. We even if you're not a lawyer, the lawyers' movement was joined by the civil society, the women's movement, the journalists. We did together take this movement forward, and I think that is the strength of the civil society in Pakistan. I also feel that institutions have to play their role as well, and it's not that difficult to play the role that the institutions are supposed to play. And when I talk about institutions, I am talking about democratic institutions, which means the parliament, the judiciary, and other arms of the state. And they have to work in harmony. And I don't think it's an impossible thing. There's always a conflict of interest, and people are playing for their own benefit all the time. But at the same time, if the constitution is clear, in our case, there are some problems with the constitution because there are certain contradictions also in the constitution itself. But by and large, this is a workable constitution. And if everybody realizes that there are limits to their power and their reach, then I think everybody does well. Now, everybody denigrates the parliament in our country. But, the point is, I don't know whether it's right to say this or not. They may be rogues, but these are our rogues. This is what we have, and we have to play with it. And in the words of Desmond Tutu, we are all prisoners of hope. And I'm also a prisoner of this hope, that if democracy goes on, the process lasts long enough, we will come out of this crisis of leadership. And better leadership will emerge if the democratic process is allowed to go on. So let's hope that none of us ever become pessimistic enough to not to want to leave this prison of hope. This is one prison I don't want to leave.
Madam, that's a beautiful quotation from Desmond Tutu, although I must say I sometimes feel that I'm in solitary confinement in that prison of optimism and hope, partly because so much of the pressure of the discourse, Chaudhry Saab, last question to you, if you could sort of quickly share your thoughts on this. So much of the discourse now demands partisanship. It demands very strong and very clear views on something. And if you see yourself as a bridge, and you said this yourself, the Hinge generation, So you see it from a chronological and generational standpoint, from one period to the next. And of course, you express some frustration with whether the Hind generation has done its part. For a lot of folks in my generation, which is Generation X, there's also the role of bridging between generations, but there's also the role of bridging between class, between nationality and identity. On this panel, you mentioned the Punjabi identity, but there's somebody from Bihar and one person from Uttar Pradesh on this panel as well. And rather than being stuck in our individual identities, so much of the responsibility in us is also to reach out across the aisle and make sure that there's inclusion because of you. Say something that will leave the viewers with some sense of hope about what's to come in Pakistan and in South Asia.
I think that there are some specifics, and they do not give me much hope at the moment, but I'll come to hope side also. Why they don't give me much hope for the time being, at least, is that I think the onus has now shifted entirely to India. There was a time in the 80s and the 90s when we could say that for the friction, for the angst and the division and the distance between these two neighbors, we and our institutions were more responsible. But I think India, first of all, has to take stock of Kashmir. It's going to keep us divided. It's going to keep us weaponized. It is going to keep us spending increasingly on weapons instead of food and welfare. If this condition in Kashmir continues, for a year they have tried. They're still using pellet guns on individuals, and there India has to take a step back. And an Indian like Farooq Abdullah, if he says to Karan Thapar that he does not want to be an Indian, and it's on the media and I've heard it myself since then, and an Indian like Farooq Abdullah, I think India has got to ponder and reflect upon this. The second thing is, where conflict and where tension is likely to be generated, instead of generating and trying to subvert the project, I think India should come in, join in, and be a part of the CPAC transformation, so to say. They've been welcomed by our government initially to be part of it, to have links therefore to Central Asia. There's so much to gain for India to be a part of this. We've got to have economic, social, cultural links to be able to then strengthen our civil societies and strengthen the movements. And there have to be concrete steps that have to be taken. Otherwise, if you look at it today, why I say it's the reverse now, the poetry that was being written in Pakistan in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the Jalib type of poetry, is now today being written by Muslim poets in India. They are the resistance in a way. They look at themselves as the resistance. And there are young men like Imran Pratap Nagri, Pratappuri, who are coming up with poetry that is moving and moves them, particularly the Muslim community. But I never heard this kind of poetry coming from the Muslim community in India before, never. And it shows the underlying schism and fracture that has been created in the body politic of India.
Chaudhry Sahab, on that note, unfortunately, given...
May I just, on that note, one last sentence to the Indians and to my friend, dear friend Prem ji, Fahmida Riaz read a poem, the first verse of which I read. She read it first in Delhi. She went to Delhi about 4 years ago, and a lot of this that is happening today was happening. And the first verse of that poem is, "Tum bhi hum jaise nikle bhai." So this has been a disappointment.
I think no more intimate way or profound way to express the sense of solidarity and unity and oneness with the people than to complain that they have turned out to be just like us. On that rather melancholy note, Premji, you'll have to unmute your mic. No, I still can't hear you. Perhaps there you go. There you go.
Oh, is it
Yes.
okay now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, just one last word. Don't give up on us. You know, the democratic system is still working. The Bihar results showed how much the BJP has lost ground. I think that in 3 years, the opposition forces that I'm thinking about will coalesce. A third front will be born. And I want to tell you one thing. On the ground, life has not changed as much as the newspapers make out. One of the clearest signs of this for me, it's a very simple social sign, is that when I walk down the street in Delhi, I can recognize immediately who's a Muslim and who's not, because they have not in any sense lost the sense of freedom to wear their clothes as they like, to cut their beards as they like, to wear a cap as they like, sandals as they like. All those little, sort of signs by which we understood who was what remain. And that is a sign of a society that is still fundamentally without fear. This is what is going on, is that it's taking place in a creamy political layer on top, but it's not so creamy. It's more like curdled milk now.
Well,
but the fact is that's happening.
I would,
and I don't give up.
Well,
okay?
Thank you for that message, and I would say that message goes for all people everywhere across all countries. We should never give up hope in each other and in ourselves to hope and to a better future. Thank you so much, Hina, Jillani, Prem Shankar Jha, and Chaudhry Aitzaz Ahsan Saab, and many thanks to Jinnah Institute for hosting what I found to be an incredibly rich and enlightening conversation. Thanks to the panelists, and thanks once again to Chairperson Sherry Rahman and the rest of the team at the Jinnah Institute. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz.
Good seeing you, Prem. I'm glad that Zoom doesn't require a visa yet.